Mastering real estate investment hinges on understanding market dynamics and location analysis. Key economic indicators such as job growth, population shifts, and infrastructure developments significantly influence real estate demand and property values. For example, regions experiencing job growth typically see an increase in housing demand, which pushes property prices upward. Conversely, areas facing economic decline may witness reduced demand and depreciating property values. Investors must recognize the importance of identifying high-growth areas by analyzing data on upcoming infrastructure projects and demographic trends. This insight can reveal potential hotspots for investment. Additionally, a thorough understanding of real estate market cycles is essential for timing investments effectively. Recognizing phases of boom, slump, recovery, and expansion allows investors to strategize purchases and sales for maximum profitability. Strategic diversification across various regions can mitigate risks linked to localized downturns and leverage growth opportunities in multiple areas, enhancing overall investment stability and potential returns. Chad, you talked a little bit about location in the last segment. How does a real estate investor decide if they should buy an investment property near where they live versus identifying a high growth area or someplace that has better prices?
I mean, I assume most people listening to this are small investors. Like I wrote a book called The Small and Mighty Investor. So that's where my heart is, for a big, huge hedge fund, they're going to think about this a little bit differently. A small investor, you often have to think very practically saying, what can I afford to buy? And so if you're in the Bay Area of California and an entry-level house is $800,000 or $600,000, or whatever the number is, right? And you have $50,000 of capital saved up, that's going to be a challenge. Maybe you can work it out with a house hack with a small down payment. That's a possibility. But I see a lot of people just looking at the practical side of things, saying how much can I afford to buy? And then using that to guide them on out of all the different places in the country. All right, these are price ranges where I can afford to buy directly and buy a property. And then from there, of course, there are other fundamentals that matter. You want to look at jobs and economics. But I found that it's a pretty simple analysis. It's not like analyzing a biochemical company or something in the stock market. We have to understand rocket ships or something. Real estate is a human being movement thing. Like, where do people want to live? Like, why do they want to live there? Do they live in South Carolina where I live because of the weather? Do they live there because they're going to work at BMW? I mean, these are things that we understand as human beings. And so if you can study it on the macro level, I like looking at like U-Haul reports, like where are people moving to? Like what part of the country are they moving to? And you find regions of the country that are popular for jobs, for movement of people. And in general, if the population is growing up in a region, that's typically going to be a good sign for you. The demand for real estate is going to be good. And so then I look within a region that you're identifying that has good overall demographics. I look at it kind of like the sun and earth and the solar system. You find a really hot region in like Atlanta, Georgia is the center of the sun. For small investors, I like going to the little planets that are in orbit around the sun. So Noonan, Georgia is where I grew up, or College Park, Georgia, are these little small 20, 30,000 person towns that are still in the orbit of the sun where all the economic activity is happening. But you find these little town centers and these more affordable pockets where you can buy a property that's in a good location, but it's not going to be as much competition and as high a prices as you're going to find right in the center of the place.
I like that approach, the sun and the planets. Russ, how do you identify and evaluate high growth areas that may not be on the radar of most investors?
Well, first of all, I love everything Chad just said, so I'm in complete agreement. And also, Crystal almost used a quote that I'm semi-famous for, which is do the math and the math will tell you what to do. So I agree with that too. So love that. But to me, I think when you think about markets, there's three components to a market. There's the geographic market, which is the way most of us think. There's the product niche market. A lot of times real estate investors only think real estate is housing or residential. Obviously, even within that space, there's student housing, there's low-end Section 8 type housing, there's single-family housing, there's small multifamily, there's large multifamily. And so a product niche could be self-storage, could be industrial, could be office, could be retail. So some markets are better than others when you talk about product niche. Residential assisted living, for example, based on the demographic is a real area of growth and high cash flow. And then the other one is a demographic. Who are you serving? So again, go back to student housing, that's a demographic, residential assisted living, that's a demographic. And so healthcare is one of the areas that's projected to have the most job growth, which tells you that any area that has a good healthcare program is probably going to have good, solid job growth going forward. So there is some analytical skills you have to have to figure out exactly what market you want to be in. But at the end of the day, it's supply and demand. And so you've got to look at both factors. So how many people are in the market, how many people are moving into the market versus out of the market, in the specific demographic and product niche you're interested in. And then what is the ongoing supply? Is there a natural constraint? Some of the most expensive real estate in the world is in areas where there's just no place to add anymore. And so you're always going to have a strong economic growth, attracting people who are going to continually bid up and push out other people that are already there. And those people end up in those those planetary markets, those submarkets that are adjacent to the main metro. And I think the other thing, when you look at the actual employment, one of the things people make a mistake about is understanding the difference between primary, secondary, and tertiary employers. And I think it's really important to understand that difference. So a primary employer is somebody that's bringing money in from outside. They sell products and services all over the world. And that money, that wealth that comes into the community then feeds into secondary businesses that exist purely to serve that primary driver. Think about Detroit back in the day when it was the major manufacturing autos. There were all kinds of companies that set up shop to be near the manufacturing of automobiles that weren't in the automobile manufacturing business, but existed because of it. Tertiary businesses are going to be the personal service type businesses, the restaurants, the doctors, the dry cleaners, all those things that are feeding both of those too. But if you lose the big one, if you lose the primary, it begins to take everything else with it. And so part of it, doing your market analysis, is understanding how friendly is a particular jurisdiction to the types of businesses that are going to come in. Atlanta, for example, Chad mentioned, is home to several Fortune 100 companies. It is a major hub for business. And because of that, there's a lot of secondary and tertiary businesses there. You go to some of these suburban, towns where, they're a bunch of retirees, that can be okay, but it's pretty mono. So, you have to understand the what is actually driving the economic activity of a market in addition to just, the supply and demand.
Crystal, what advice do you give to new investors about identifying and how to select investment properties?
Yeah, definitely location. Like Russell and Chad said, it does come down to location. And then there's two main things about that. You want to know, it's the city and where you are in that city. Those are the top two things. And then so the first, the city. Vegas just had it was like a 19% increase in sales. So, that's an area that's going through growth. But then you see other places like West Coast and Florida, where they call it the snowbirds, where they're flocking to. That could possibly be a saturated market. It could be harder to find deals or harder to find sales. So that's a city where you can decide, okay, that's a city where growth is happening. I'm not moving to a VHS manufacturing plant that just closed. You don't want to pick, a dying industry. And then two, look at where you are in that city. You don't want to be near the crime areas of that city. And that's where the research and the data is going to come into, okay, are these great schools or, transportation? Is this horrible traffic area? So there's other things to look at within that city also. Or do you want to be on the outskirts in the suburbs, where there is less competition? So those are also things to look at. Like, you really have to think of that why of, what you're doing.
Joe, do you have any tools or resources that you can recommend to investors that they use when performing this location analysis?
Man, you asked me the wrong question. That was for any of the other three people. So I'm gonna answer the question that I thought you were gonna ask me. How do you like that? I don't like that one, so I'm gonna ask my own. What's funny is that even if you are, I don't know, Chad, how to take your discussion about planets and make this work, but maybe in the sun, which would be Atlanta or the city, there's also hot spots and areas that are up and coming. I know. And the reason I say that is, and I'm going to just go back to the same example I used before, which is my own son. So his properties are almost all, to Russell's point, in Detroit. And because of the fact that he knows Detroit really well, he knows that quote son really well. He knows where the battle is being fought. He knows that city intimately enough that he is, number one, he's concentrated, which to Russell's point could be worrisome. But on the other side, he knows where the safest places are in that city. He knows where the rehab's happening. You look at the city in general. I mean, that city has been, for people that don't know Detroit has really changed over the last 10 years, a ton. We saw it with the NFL draft. And I think what's cool also inside that city, and also I think, Russ, pointing back to something that you said, and I'm going to use a Chad Carson analogy, is Chad, do you like this one? You're the football coach, and like Jimmy Johnson, who's a great football coach, knew how to change his strategy based on the players that he had. So going back to something, seconding what Russ said, one house he had when he was first beginning, he put a long-term renter in there, and thank God he figured out what he was doing quick enough, and that renter moved out at the end of a year, that he realized he was 3 blocks away from a hospital. And he immediately pivoted that short-term rental into a midterm rental. And now he has these visiting nurses that are there, and he's making substantially more money just by knowing what the great things are in that particular neighborhood, like knowing what players to put on the field, to use a Chad Carson approach to this.
Love that. I'm going to put my helmet on just listening to that.
That's
right. You're firing me up, Joe.
One for the Gipper. Well, thank you for the media training, Joe. Answer the question that you want to answer.
Yes.
Let's go to segment 3.